Are y'all seeing the chat on your end now? Okay, so we'll do the original plan
You
with
good.
the Q&A.
Hmm.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Oh, I can see hearts. Okay, emojis. Oh, yeah, keep the hearts coming, y'all. I love that. Aw, we feel so loved already. All right. Looks like people are trickling in. Welcome. Continue to send heart emojis. It looks like that's the only way we're going to be able to feel y'all's energy outside of the Q&A box. So keep all of that coming. Oh, and raising hands. Hi, Michael. Welcome. I don't know if you meant to do that. Um, but we'll go ahead and get started for the sake of time. So welcome everyone to our webinar. I'm Dr. Breigh Jones-Coplin. I am at the University of Denver Clinical Assistant Professor. And I just want to wish everyone a happy day, happy morning, whatever side of the world you're on. On behalf of APA Division 47 Diversity Collective and ASP, we are so glad that you all are joining us today. The Diversity Collective was established to create opportunities for members to actively engage and contribute to division, equities, inclusion, and um, belonging initiatives. Members of the collective share leadership responsibilities and curate events, panels, resources, and initiatives that foster culturally humble and sensitive practices that meet the evolving needs of our members in our field. So today's webinar reflects that commitment. This webinar is actually a part of a collaborative series between Division 47 and ASP. So it's called Still Navigating Uncertain Times because we had last year a series called Navigating Uncertain Times, and things have not changed, sadly enough. So we are still navigating them. And that was intentionally created to support our community in moments like the one we're currently living in. I want to first take a moment to share a bit about how this series came to be, and I know Dr. Aaron Goodson is going to share a little bit of insight as well. So, this work initially started as a response to what was happening and continues to happen in Minnesota and across the country, the United States of America. Of course, over the past few months, we've witnessed significant immigration enforcement activity, community disruption, and widespread protests in response to ICE raids and related events. So, given that ASK will be hosted in Minnesota this year, it felt especially important for us to not overlook that specific context, but to instead acknowledge it, honor it, and create space for our field to engage with it thoughtfully. This became an opportunity for collaboration between the two divisions to bring our respective communities together because I know sometimes it can feel a little siloed, so that we're not just observing what happens, but we can reflect and engage in dialogue and community building together. And since we began that first planning phase, the broader context, as we know, has only expanded. We are now also navigating global conflict, economic uncertainty, and ongoing social and political tensions that continue to impact both our personal and professional roles. So, before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something that probably doesn't even need to be said right now, but I'm going to say it out loud. Many of us are navigating a lot right now. So the way that you're showing up to this space, we want to honor what you're holding professionally, personally, socially. We're living and working in a time where the world can feel really heavy, unpredictable, and at times overwhelming. And as psychologists, educators, consultants, practitioners, humans, we are often holding space for others while also carrying our own responses to what's happening around us. That tension is so real, and it's part of why we created this space. So this webinar is meant to get us thinking more intentionally about how we lead in those roles, how we care, and how we sustain ourselves with ongoing uncertainty. So this session is going to build on the care space that we hosted a couple weeks ago, where we created a room for reflection, connection, and honest dialogue. And it was a beautiful, intimate space about us just being able to release what we were holding on to. So today's webinar is meant to complement that care space by offering some framework, some language, and strategies to help us navigate the uncertainty that we're all navigating and dealing with in ways that feel grounded and sustainable. So I'm going to quit talking. I'm going to hand it over to my co-star over here, one of my favorite people, Dr. Aaron Goodson, into the space. Aaron has been instrumental in advancing ASK diversity initiatives and supporting the affinity groups in that space to create connection, advocacy, education, and community within that organization. So Aaron, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about that work.
Thanks so much, Breigh. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. As Breigh mentioned, my name is Aaron Goodson, and I currently serve as the DEIBJ Division Head for ASP. And so what that stands for is Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belonging, and Justice Division Head. This is a division that has existed for a long time, but formally became part of ASP e-board in 2019. It consists of being able to support three committees largely: the Diversity Committee, the International Relations Committee, and the Advocacy Committee. And all of these committees do and are part of very different things in the ASP organization. And so Breigh mentioned our affinity groups that largely run through our Advocacy Committee. Our affinity groups include those of Black students and professionals, Latinx students and professionals, Jewish students and professionals. We have two new affinity groups in our disability and sport affinity group, as well as students for social justice affinity group. But beyond that, and it's holding spaces for people, each of these three entities has done a lot to be able to create spaces throughout the organization. So there have been regional conferences that have been heavily influenced by these three divisions, or excuse me, these three committees. We have special interest groups as well. And they've also been a part of informing the e-board on training as it relates to how to become different and better leaders, also involved in conference planning to make our spaces more welcoming, more accessible in a variety of ways. And so it's been very active, all three of these committees, and then especially with the division head for quite some time, but continuing to build our momentum and hold opportunities like this and collaborating with Division 47, being able to bring in professionals that are outside of our organization, but really can help us better understand and better implement things for us as practitioners, better serve our clients. And so really excited for today's event and all the previous collaboration we've done, but also collaboration we'll do in the future.
Thank you so much, Erin. So before we turn it over to Dr. Bryan, just a couple logistical things. So you all have access to the Q&A chat. I think there's going to be some engagement I heard from our speaker today. So feel free to use that. Feel free to use emojis. You don't need to wait until the end of the Q&A portion or towards the Q&A portion for you to leave a question. As they come up, please throw them in the chat, and then I will be facilitating. Just want to remind people that these conversations can tap into a little bit of vulnerabilities, things that might feel uncomfortable. So the first thing we want to reiterate is just creating a co-learning space that is full of respect and intention, knowing that your words matter and that they have impact. And so we want to make sure that we are all engaging in a way that is respectful and honoring of all people's perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences as you are engaging in dialogue together. So without further ado, I'm going to get into introducing our speaker for today. So I feel especially excited to not introduce, because we'll hear from Dr. Bryan that he actually has some training, formal training in performance psychology, but Dr. Bryan and I are colleagues at the University of Denver together. And so I'm happy to introduce him a little bit into my world of Division 47 in this way. So Dr. Bryan O. Rojas-Arauz is bilingual, bicultural, Afro-Indigenous immigrant of Costa Rican and Panamanian descent. He is a psychologist, educator, and scholar activist whose work challenges dominant narratives in mental health. His work focuses on trauma, immigration, and culturally responsive and decolonial healing, and the social conditions that shape well-being. He is the founder of In Lakesh Counseling, Education, and Consulting, a clinical assistant professor in the International Disaster Psychology, Trauma, and Global Mental Health Program at the University of Denver, and a co-author of the workbook for social action for counselors, psychologists, and helping professionals. At the heart of his work is a commitment to dignity, belonging, and collective care. So we are so excited to hear directly from an expert about all the things that we are kind of navigating. And we are incredibly grateful, Dr. Bryan, to have you in this space and your presence and your leadership in our field. So I'm going to hand it over to you. We'll have about 20-ish minutes of the presentation, then we'll come back on to have some dialogue.
Awesome, awesome. Dr. Breigh, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you folks for being here. I think in moments like now, it's important for us to come together and really think about how do we reclaim some of the work that we do and where we do it. As Dr. Breigh said, I had the pleasure of being an intern, a resident PhD, performance health psychology at the University of Boulder here in Colorado. And I was a collegiate athlete. I have been involved with sports for most of my life, being a coach, right? So have gotten to see different parts of what it means to have an identity that is shaped by what we do, and a lot of times shaped by the sports that we're involved with. But today we're going to be talking about leadership, and we're going to bring a little bit of a decolonial lens to what it means to be a leader uh, in a different kind of way. So, leading through uncertain times, decolonizing leadership and what Native communities teach us about relationship, accountability, and resistance. Um, I'm assuming you're able to see the right slide and everything's working as it's supposed to. If at any point that's not the case, uh, raise a hand, let us know. Also, if we were in the space together as a slam poet, I usually have folks snap if something that was said they're feeling, right? So what I'm going to ask you all to do is use them emojis. Let me know that, we're connecting to the material, is making sense, and please ask questions at any point as you need to. The first thing that I'm going to have you all do is really bring some intentionality to this space. In Lakesh Lakin is the Mayan greeting that used to be used as a way of recognizing each other's humanity. From native tradition, we look at each other as being sacred from the moment we come into this world, and that sacredness carrying through who we are always. So it's gonna feel a little funny, but I'm gonna do it anyways. We're gonna do a little call and response, right? And call and response is this idea that when I say hip, y'all say hop, right? But instead, we're gonna do a call and response where we repeat one after another. I won't be able to hear your voices in this moment, but I will take them that they're happening. So I invite you to repeat after me. And Dr. B and Aaron, if y'all wanna come in and use your voices, I appreciate that. All right. So it says, En la kesha lakin.
In
En
Rakesh
Lakesh Alakin,
Alakim,
Tú eres
tú
tú
eres
eres
mi otro yo.
mi
mi
otro
otro
yo.
yo.
You are my other me.
You are my
You
other
are my
me.
other me.
Si te hago
Se
Si
te
te
hago
hago
daño a ti,
daño a
daño a
ti,
ti
if I do harm to you,
if I do
if I
harm to
do
you.
harm to you,
me hago
Me
me
hago
hago
daño
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 a mí mismo.
a mí
a mí
mismo.
mismo.
I do harm to myself.
I do harm to
I do harm
myself.
to myself.
Si te amo
Se te
Si te
amo
amo
y respeto,
y
y
respeto.
respeto,
if I love and respect you,
If I love
if
and
I love
respect
and respect you,
me amo
you. Me
me
amo
amo
y respeto yo.
y
y
respeto yo.
respeto yo.
I love and respect myself.
I love and
I love
respect
and
my
respect myself.
In Lakesh.
in
In
Lakesh.
Lakesh.
Thank you all for doing that. Right. So what does it mean when we lead from this space? When we think about leadership, often we're not thinking about uh, this equal footing in which we start. As a matter of fact, we have been conditioned, trained, and have been in spaces for such a long time that we just normalize a hierarchy as the way that things have to be. I don't know if this is gonna work, so we're gonna use it just as a question for you all to think about. What does good leadership feel like? Usually, when we think about leadership, it's not about what it feels like; it's what we do in it. It's usually a task. So what does good leadership feel like? I want to invite you to think about good leaders that you've had in your life, maybe good coaches, maybe good professors, right? That were able to use relationship as the center of what we were doing, and not a positionality thing. If we're able to live from a place where leadership feels good and we're able to feel safe and our nervous system is regulated in that leadership, a lot of good things can come from it. And the most important thing is that those we're trying to serve feel like they're seen as the people, as they're seen as whole humans. They're seen as people beyond just the athlete. I think that many of us have been around sports long enough where shut up and dribble was just a thing that we continue to hear, right? And it's not as simple as do what we do as athletes, but also who else are we and how else are we impacted by what's happening now? The reality is also that all of the folks that we serve are currently going through a lot. They're struggling in a landscape that is constantly shifting. We know that finances in academia, including impacting sports, are currently happening, is impacting the people that we directly serve. We think of most of our leagues in professional sports and the diversity that exists within them. And those specific communities being attacked, whether it is the Latino community, Black community, LGBTQ community, right? Where we see an attack on women's rights, like all of this is happening. And we're trying to serve folks that are trying to continue to do their work while living in this context. The other thing that is true is that we're also experiencing it, right? A lot of the times, and especially felt true during the pandemic, as healers and as professionals and providers, we were expected to continue to work and take care of everybody else. And many times it felt like they forgot that we were also going through those spaces. So, as we think about leadership today, we know that 56% of US workers report leadership related burnout. It's too much. It wasn't what they signed up for. Maybe it wasn't what we thought of. This comes from the Global Leadership Forecast, a report that they wrote in 2025. 41% of Black professionals report racism affecting their work. And I would probably say that's probably underreported, right? Systems continue to exist in ways in which they cause harm. And a lot of times, well, we go along to get along, right? And we have worked really hard to get to certain positions. And what does it mean to risk that? And what are we able or willing to risk in that moment? And lastly, 43% of Americans are feeling more anxious and there is more mental health concerns. There is a pandemic of isolation that is taking place right now. So we're not just leading in ordinary times. Racial violence, institutional collapse, climate crisis, and mental health emergencies are not the background, they are the context. I tell my students when I teach them that to not know the context of your clients is to not know them at all. Like we cannot pretend that people are just a list of symptoms or a list of roles and titles without truly knowing who they are. When we think of Western leadership models, it has always been built for stability, not disruption. The idea is how do we continue to keep the status quo doing what it has always done? Secondly, is who was it built for and for whom, right? And like, I also ask that question usually when I look at articles or when I read any kind of scholarly work. Who wrote this and for whom? And why were they the best person to tell that story? We know that our leagues and our institutions look different from maybe when they were established. And it's important for us to take that into account. And lastly, if we don't change the way in which we lead, there is a cost to it, and that is extraction of a relationship. What can we get from our athletes is yes about performance, efficiency over wisdom or getting to know one another, certainty over presence, right? Many times we feel like we have to speak with authority or be the most knowledgeable person in the room. And what does that mean? And what does that do to relationship? Overall, it becomes a task over everything else. Some of these questions, if we had more time with each other, I would love to sit down and have a conversation, right? But I invite you to reflect on it. Who was this model designed to serve? Think about your own institutions. What are some of the rules and regulations that maybe no longer work? Where do you see this model breaking down in your own world or in your organization? What are communications falling apart, or in which ways do we cannibalize ourselves of who we are as people to try to fit into these molds? And lastly, what has it cost you personally to lead within this model? A lot of us had to learn how to move in systems that often didn't reflect us, and we continue to work in them. And in some ways, maybe we might be one of the few people that look like us in the spaces in which we work and serve. So, what does that mean, and what does that do to us along the way? Often people talk about what we gain through education, but very little is said about what parts did we lose along the way. It's also important for us to know that when a system doesn't work, it affects us and affects our nervous system. So before we make decisions, our nervous system has already responded. If we feel dysregulated as leaders, We live from a place of fear, not values. So it's important for us to slow down and slow down enough um, to ask ourselves, am I living my values? Am I showing up in a way that makes sense? From a polyvagal lens, we talk about fight, flight, and freeze, right? So fight is reactivity, controlling, punitive leadership, making sure we're in control of others as if we could. Flight is avoidance or delegation without support. Just get it done. And many of us have been on the other end of some of these things, and we know what that feels like. And hopefully, in that experience, we learn how we wanted to change things. Freeze, paralysis, silence, inaction under pressure, or not wanting to say anything because it might rock the boat. Somatic leadership is about learning. Regulation is not just a wellness practice, but it is a competency for us. We need to be able to know how to take care of our own nervous system before we go take care of others. There is a reason why folks come to us as mental health providers, and one of our most, I think, undervalued interventions is presence. Michael Bober talked about the I-Thou relationship, and the I-Thou relationship is a relationship you see between a parent and a child, or maybe between mutual friendship. I-Thou relationship is I see the human in you, and hopefully you see me too. A lot of times we're forced to move in an I-it relationship where it just looks like we're going through the numbers or just someone else I had to see today and move along. Part of it is the way in which we're trained, right? We have a 50-minute session and we got to pack everything into that and I'll see you next week and we'll make it work that way. But the reality is that when it comes to relationships, sometimes we got to figure out how to work within those spaces or name the way in which it's out of the normal and it's maybe not what we would like to do. We would like to give every client all as many hours as possible and also recognize that there are some constraints to that. But naming that also allows our clients to have some regulation and maybe feel understood in their experience. What would it mean to lead differently? So, what would it mean to really change the way in which we lead? So, I'm going to juxtapose uh, a different way to lead. From traditional leadership, we talked about extraction of a relationship, right? We look at athletes as output. So, what do we measure? Focus, confidence, resilience. Are you able to get to your peak performance? Hierarchy as the natural order, right? And when we took a look at leadership as coaches, the authority, athletes are the recipients, things flow downward. And feedback is usually about correction. Individual decision making, someone is in charge and they do that individually. Expertise over lived wisdom. A lot of times we forget to ask our athletes, what is it that you'll need? Right? I think a lot about, I have a colleague that works out in Portland, and she checks in and we're in communication. She's their performance and health provider. And in that work, many of the clients she's serving are Latino men. How do we just play ball when we're seeing our own communities being attacked and persecuted day in and day out? Where we know that we're not able to hide TikTok or Facebook or anything else from what's happening. And many of us, uh, many times unconsciously, end up doom scrolling as a way of trying to figure out what do we do next. So the importance of knowing what our clients need takes getting to know them at a different kind of level. Accountability is punishment. Usually, accountability is about how do we get you to do the thing right versus growth. And then certainty is strength. If I show that I don't know, or if I show that I'm not the expert, all of a sudden I will be questioned in a way that will take my credibility, right? And what does it mean to not lead from a cultural, humble perspective? And cultural humility is something that we talk a lot about. And what I found through my work is that cultural humility a lot of times stops people from acting. You get stuck on not wanting to do or say the wrong thing, and I'm so humble that I'm going to let you teach me. And then we stop at that. So we move to a place of cultural responsiveness as the goal. Because when I'm being culturally responsive, now there's responsibility on me to respond to what's in front of me. The colonial leadership looks like reciprocity as foundation, understanding that we change the clients that we work with, but we're also changed by them. I tell my students often that some of the best teachers they will ever have are not in the classroom, but instead in their clinical room. And the way that we honor them is by continuing to do better as we continue to move forward. Also, collective discernment. What does it mean to not have a hierarchy that looks like a triangle, but creating a honeycomb where we're able to come together and make decisions that work for all of us? Communities, the authority, the people that are most affected by what's happening, those in the margins being centered, as a way of knowing what's best for them. I also invite folks to think about how ancestral wisdom can come alongside research. We often talk about what does it mean to have evidence-based practices, and we forget to have practice-based evidence. How do people back home in Venezuela usually take care of their mental health? Do we know the historical context in which there were psychologists and therapists in Egyptian culture, and there were psychologists and therapists in Mayan and Aztec culture? What was it that they did? How did they help their people? Right. And a lot of times for many of us, the story starts with someone named Freud. And I always find it funny that it's almost like Freud invented talking, and kind of what that means for many of the folks that don't see themselves reflected in our profession. It also means relationship as the work. If you have relationship to fall back on, the task will get done. And we'll go back to that idea of the presence of as being the strength or the intervention that will help us most, both in leadership and clinical work. When we're able to go from a decolonial leadership space, all of a sudden, dignity, belonging, cultural identity become the center of what we're working with. Um, Leadership is framed as stewardship, and we'll talk about what that might look like in practice here in a second. And the athlete is a full human, being shaped by what's happening in history, family, culture. What does it mean when we carry the pressure of like, I have to make this work for me and my whole entire family? And many of us maybe know that being in this field, maybe you're the first one in your family to get a college degree or get a doctorate degree. And now you have to write for every single person you ever knew and represent in a way that often is not talked about. What happens if we actually bring this into the space and allow for that to be a conversation? Native models of circular leadership look at leadership as constantly moving, and there is not really a starting point. In many indigenous traditions, the most trusted leader is the best server, right? So, what does it mean to be to service to your community? What does it mean to really be accountable to your actions? How would leadership in this country would look different if that was the case? The circle has no head. The decision making goes through collective discussion, conversation, accountability to past and future generations. Um, in Native tradition, we talk about 7 generations. And when I sitting in session with a client, I tell them their work, it's heavy work. They're there for 14 generations, 7 generations back, being the 7th generation doing their healing work, but also 7 generations forward that will be impacted by the work that we do in clinical work. And we got to believe that if intergenerational trauma is passed down, so has to be intergenerational resilience. There so has to be so many other things that we do for ourselves. But looking at healing is also a community, um, a collective space. So from a leadership space, we create room for storytelling. We hear about what do they know, right? What is it, the things that they bring to the table? Who else do we bring into the space? Are there community healers that could come into a room and bring some of that healing with them? Also making sure that when we go out and ask elders or mentors or community members to come and teach us, that we compensate them and we compensate them in a way that we're honoring their wisdom, and it's not just extractive, which is a practice that I think is in academia and many other spaces we are accustomed to. Asking them, how does this impact as we move forward? Another thing that we usually do is a conocimiento círculo. And a conocimiento círculo, the word conocer in Spanish means to know, but also to get to know. So you could meet somebody, conocer a alguien, as much as you can conocer a alguien, which means really know, get to know them. So when we think as conocimiento as a leadership practice, it allows us to have a deep knowing of who the person is, a really deep embodiment of ourselves, but also our relationship to others. What does it mean to know their stories? Sustain presence. You cannot lead who you don't know. Ultimately, you cannot sustain leadership from just yourself or just doing what maybe worked, or perform leadership how you have seen it worked, maybe in the past. How do we make it feel different? And when it comes to sports performance, athlete-coach relationships rooted in genuine knowing, not just performance data. How do we actually get to know each other in a personal level? And again, we are in spaces, professional spaces that tell us, maybe as therapists and psychologists, you gotta come into the room as a blank slate. The reality is that if you came into a room and I was sitting there, I am tatted up, I have long hair, I'm an Afro-Indigenous psychologist that often gets, you don't look like a psychologist, right? We're already having a conversation of who we are before we even said the first word, and the importance of that in the work that we do. So I used to have a coach that used to say, it's not what you do when coach is watching, it's what you do when coach is not, right? And the importance of that and remembering that, on and off the field. So I invite you to think about that. How do your athletes know you to be? Not when you're with them, but in general. What do you know about the communities you serve beyond what they produce? What do you know about the communities you serve? What do you know about migration stories? How do people adapt to be in front of you? Whether it was forced, intentional, or not. What do we know about these people's history is an important part of that conversation. And what parts of ourselves are we set aside to be able to work in this system? So I know we're about the 20-minute mark. We'll get there quickly. So three teachings, we'll make them quick on how do we move forward and how to make these pillars work for us. I think that we've driven the idea home that relationship is the infrastructure, is what we're working towards. It is what we want to center. Um, it requires knowing people and who they are. And for sports psychologists, it may be therapeutic alliance, team cohesion, coach athlete trust. These are not the soft skills, these are actually what we need for everything else to work. Secondly, we look at accountability not as punishment, but accountability as restorative. So, what does this person deserve? What do they need? How do we help them heal, get better, improve? We replace punitive performance reviews with growth centered dialogue. How do we help you be better at what you do and who you are? Holding and accountable, right? Accountability is also about making sure that we are honest and transparent with folks. So there's a way for us to be able to keep someone accountable without having to be harsh. What does it mean to have compassionate accountability? They are not opposite to each other. They can actually be part of the same interaction. And lastly, repairs leadership skill. So our ability when we cause harm, our ability to say, I messed up. How do we make it better? Right? And a lot of times we have a really hard time saying sorry. So what does that mean on the other end? How do we change that? How do we change that practice? And often it starts with us. When it comes to actual models of, and this was written for social action, but when it comes to a model of thinking through leadership as well, we created something called the squad model for social action. And it looks at four areas of reflection. These don't build on one another, they kind of happen at the same time, right? But the first thing that we look at is strength. What am I good at? What is it that I already bring to the table? How can I translate some of those skills? It might be skills that you learn as a professional or things that you learn in your community that you're able to bring back into this space. Secondly, solidarity. How do we do it together? How do I bring others to the table who's not at the table? Do I need to move the table or create a whole different one? Questions that are worth asking, right? Third one is strategy, right? Without us having a strategy or a plan on how we're going to implement those strengths and that solidarity, we're just kind of running into places. Um, and really thinking we can have all the passion in the world, it can be a burning fire, but without the ability to lead that or focus that in a certain kind of way, eventually either burns the whole place down or just burns out, which leads me to the fourth S, which is sustainability. How do we do this for the long haul? I know that things feel heavy right now, more so than maybe they have before. But the reality is that when you talk to native communities, they'll tell you it has been 500 years of colonization, 500 years of resistance, 500 years of leading through relationship. So how do we implement that to our own work? So when it comes to what we do, Um, we slow down to consult, right? We decide to bring that collective knowledge into the space, believing in it. We need power dynamics whenever it's possible, right? And really thinking about what is our positionality? What is it that I get? And how do people listen to me because there's letters after my name? We also check in with ourselves before we engage. And we teach others to do the same, right? Emotional regulation or mindfulness becomes a superpower of its own. Um, what would it be like? Maybe this week, right? Starting meetings with a relational check-in instead of agenda items. Maybe naming a power dynamic in the organization. And we have been avoiding that conversation because it might be uncomfortable, but how do we shift it or change it? How do we identify if there's an accountability process that exists? And if it doesn't exist, how do we create that, right? So at times I come and do restorative justice circles with organizations and even with organizations that are full of mental health providers that are trauma responsive and try to be having an additional help could be something that gets us there. So I invite you to think through that when it comes to the different levels in which we can impact our organizations at an individual, interpersonal, institutional level. How do we look at structure and the ways in which things may or may not be working? So I will make the slides available, Dr. B, to you. So if folks want to get all of this and others information on them, we're not going to have the time to get through. But before we leave this room, imaginary room, or this part of the conversation, I invite you to consider what kind of leaders do you want to be in uncertain times? How do you want to show up for people? The first question that I asked at the beginning was, what does good leadership feel like? The question that I'm asking at the end is, how do you make sure that leadership feels good to others? What taught you, who taught you how to lead? And what did they know that your training didn't? I want to invite you to think about your communities, your abuelitos, your abuelitas, your parents, maybe a coach in childhood, right? What was it about them that maybe the place in which we got the PhDs at forgot to mention? What would it mean to lead as if the people you serve are your other selves? What if we were a reflection of each other? So I'll leave you with, I am you and you are me. Healing is not a solitary act, it's a sacred, collective, and political one. May your practice be grounded in love, your leadership be rooted in community, and your work be an act of liberation always. Thank you.
Wow.
Let me stop sharing my screen. We'll come back up. Yeah,
You're getting a lot of hearts and a lot of hand claps.
I appreciate y'all. Thank you, thank you,
So
thank you.
deserved. And that was only 20 minutes of all of the heat that you were bringing. So thank you for that. So much wisdom there. So I know Aaron has some questions. I have some questions. We're going to engage in some dialogue together. And then know that the Q&A box is open. Whatever insights or questions or curiosities that came up for you during Dr. Bryan's talk, please, we would love to hear from you. And he'll be able to provide some expertise based on your own specific personal questions as well. So, Aaron, you want to kick us off? What did that evoke in you? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, there's so many things that are coming to mind for me right now, and I don't know if what you shared could be more timely for me personally, but I imagine for a lot of us in the space. Um, as you alluded to in your presentation, the reality that we live, those of us that work in sports spaces, I'm thinking about what it looks like more specifically to decolonize leadership in those spaces that are not only built on but reinforce colonization. We think about the
Mhm.
hierarchies as it relates to titles and status, um, and really not just maybe one title or status above or below yours, but we think about entire systems of it. So I think about if I can put it in a concise way, maybe what does it look like to skip levels and be able to show up authentically in this way with people you may not get to interact with regularly or things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we are a relationship first kind of space, um, you treat the CEO and the janitor the exact same way, right? Like we treat the starter and the bench warmer the exact same way, right? Like we have to go to that space where humanity is what leads us. Also, regardless of where we're at in that space, we know we are somewhere higher up because they call you doctor, right? So like there's something about when you say something, people are gonna listen to you. You might have the ear of leadership in a different kind of way. We also model through doing, right? So maybe someone above you saw the way in which you relate to your athletes and the way in which you talk to them and the way in which this is impacting the way in which they show up to practice, to games, to everything else, right? So I'll leave those two as examples, right? So leading with leadership and then modeling what that might look like and the impact they can have might also change systems. The third one, and this was a question that a student asked, what happens when we don't agree with a certain systemic thing? Dr. B knows me. I'm a get into good kind of trouble type of troublemaker. So do that. Make sure that you know your allies and alligators, right? Make sure that you know who you're walking with, how you can walk with folks. You don't have to do it alone. But willing to push, right? And I think that we are all professionals and we have gotten higher learning degrees by knowing how to work in a system. And a lot of times we're bilingual or multilingual in a way that, other folks maybe didn't have to. So use that as a superpower as well.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think about the bilingual, multilingual in ways that folks might not readily recognize, but you also said something that made me think about the idea that sometimes we ask ourselves of whether we need to push or not, and we might be asking ourselves the wrong question. The question is not whether you push or not; it's that you're going to push, so it's how do I push? And I
Hmm.
think as I'm hearing you and reflecting on my experience as well, that relational piece is something that allows that informs the way that we will push. And that's not to say you're leveraging relationships or manipulating the relationship or exploiting the relationship, but just understanding how that can be a fulcrum and how that can be the foundation for how you're able to ask the questions, draw attention to inequities and things of that nature. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And as you say that, right, like I had a mentor once say, those in positions of power make decisions, those without power make relationships, right? And kind of what that means in action, right? Like, and it's not transactional. Like, my relationship with you is real, but then when things come up, I can also fall back in that relationship from a real perspective. Yeah.
You are speaking. I mean, the make sure you know your allies and alligators. That was my first time hearing that. I'm like, I'm writing that down. Alligators part. Um,
You know.
I'm just sitting with like we all have different levels of experiences working within systems. And I think sometimes people don't realize how resistance shows up, like resistance towards good change and transformational leadership. And so I just want to like talk about that piece because said Western cultures and systems are built for stability and not disruption. And that leads to the status quo. And I think a lot of times we are perpetuating that status quo because of a variety of things, right? It can get really complicated. But I guess like as you are hearing me kind of reflect that back to you, how you maybe personally, professionally experience resistance in structures and systems, how you disrupt things that feel more stable and or are getting pushed back on how you want to disrupt those systems. Like what are some of the steps that you can encourage people to take to be able to disrupt systems in a way that feels effective and meaningful? Because we're all trying our best, right? And we all fall victim to wanting to take the path of least resistance because that's the easiest in a lot of different ways. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the question that comes up from, like, as you were saying, that what came out for me is this, right? Like, often allies, and we can decide whether we are allies or we're talking about the allies to us. Ask the question, what is it um, that you need me to do, right? And the thing is that for many of us, we've been needing you to do the same thing for a long time. That hasn't changed. The question becomes, what are you willing to risk, right? And positionality helps, right? Like if you're a tenure track faculty person, you're more secure than the first year, like associate professor, right? So like, how do we leverage some of these positionality points to push against systems, right? Also, not doing it alone. So going back to that solidarity piece, right? How do we get other folks to like come alongside? I think that we understand that business as usual doesn't work and it hasn't been working for a long time. So change needs to happen. We're in a society that is very transactional. Money runs a lot of things, right? So how do we become bilingual, multilingual in translating some of these things? Many of us had to write dissertations, if not all of us had to write dissertations in order to get these degrees. Are there transferable skills on that? Is that an op-ed that you could write right now and like bring awareness to something that's happening? Is there a white paper that we could write on how to change leadership in athletics? Is there models that work elsewhere and we can bring that in? And also, I would say something that could be helpful is bring someone from the outside. A lot of times I go into organizations and I say what I have to say and then I leave. And it's like, well, that was the one guy, but hey, now that he said it, right? So like it's kind of like being able to use your allies in the outside as well.
That's definitely the path I decided to take. Dr. Bryan's gonna come and convict y'all and challenge y'all instead of me because I have to work here, right?
That part.
Yeah. I think even to that point of even if it's not being able to bring in someone external, really being deliberate about bringing external perspectives in. And I think about just and in some ways, some folks maybe respect the really colonized external perspectives as a metric of success, right? The hey, Google did this, Facebook did this, etc. But I think there's a way to even just like leverage that mechanism and say like, hey, actually, this external perspective that's a bit more decolonized, a bit more focused on the relationships, a bit more focused on what we've talked about, bring something to us that actually pushes us forward further and faster than some of the traditional approaches that we may be looking to or deferring to. So
Yeah. Snaps to that. That's real.
Yeah. You talked about honeycomb leadership, right? Instead of maybe different from the
Mhm.
hierarchical, linear, triangular leadership that we are used to. And so and also I want to couple that with something else you said, the most trusted leader is the best server. So to me, that speaks to humility and you being able to not always show up as I'm the expert, listen to me, I'm in control. It's really relying on the expertise and the experience of everyone within the system. Like you said, the bench warmer is treated the same as the, star player. So can you give us some like more insight into how we can create more of a honeycomb leadership structure. And what that looks like from a personal perspective too, because I think we all have a duty in contributing
Mhm.
to that, right? Like, what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, anything like, again, it's almost stepping outside of what we have been trained to do. As professors, you come into the classroom and we do this knowledge banking system where I'm the professor, I know some things, you're gonna pay out to all of y'all slowly throughout the whole entire quarter, and hopefully you'll learn some things by the end of week 10. What does it mean to come into a classroom and be like, hey, I believe in the collective knowledge that exists in this room today before we even start the class? Right. I believe that all of you have lived experience that is going to be an asset to this space. Right. What would it be like to ask your athletes, hey, we have some funds and we're trying to move money in a certain type of way to benefit you and your wellness. What would it be like to make them part of that conversation? Right. Even little things. We're going to have a team event. There's going to be food. Do we need to get some arepas in the space? Do we need to like bring some tostones, right? Like, do we bring some cultural foods and not from a performative space? Right? But truly bringing people to the table and having that conversation. Is it more work? Probably. Is it going to take longer? Yes. Right? But is it going to create more cohesion, more like understanding of each other in that space? What happens when maybe you're Puerto Rican and um, we brought some mofongo to the space and that's what we're eating? All of a sudden, I'm telling you stories about my abuelita and the way in which this food hits different. And like now you're seeing me beyond just the athlete that I am. Right. So, like, creating those spaces at the table and asking who's not being part of decision making and why. Right. And I understand we're still part of structures and we're still part of systems. So it's hard sometimes to create space for that. But can we slowly start building that out? Um, and I think that if we're able to get better results, which I truly believe we can by doing this, and I've seen it in practice in community, right? In that circular honeycomb approach, the person in leadership shifts. You start as a leader, you become a teacher, and you're teaching someone else how to lead, right? You come back around and maybe somebody else has a different skill. You're also a student. Then you pass on stewardship to the next person and you push them and uplift them so they can also lead. This idea of having the same leadership always also doesn't work, right?
Yes.
And we're seeing it in real life, not in our I mean in our campuses too, but at a national level, right? Like folks that feel out of touch with people. And what would it mean if they actually saw themselves reflected in us? How would leadership change? How would policy change? How would some of these things maybe be more for the people instead at the people?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
You are absolutely speaking. I think specifically something that I've noticed in the sports psych field, and I'm calling people in when I say this. Um, it could feel like people hoard opportunities, that it feels like, and not hoarding from a like strategic standpoint, but I think we have this tendency to like always just think about the same people over and over again, and we never kind of diversify or, do the train the trainer model where I'm the leader, I'm intentionally moving into teacher mode so I can create space for others from an intentionality standpoint. And I think that leads to, and maybe I'm thinking about, um, people want to have security in their jobs. They want to remain relevant and want to remain at the top of our field, but also that, I don't know, restricts people from opportunities that might be
Mhm.
afforded to them. So I just want to reflect that I think I see that's very real in our field, and maybe an encouragement for everyone here and for us to you know, use that framework as a way of, engage in really meaningful mentorship to where we're not using the same people for the same opportunities or the same leadership skills or whatever, and really diversifying the pool, because there are some really great, passionate people out in the field, but it's hard when the same people are getting the same opportunities. Yeah. Um, I think we might have time for one more like question or some. Do you have questions for us, Brian?
I don't have, I mean, appreciation and gratitude, right? Like that's what comes for me. I'm reading out the Q&A and there's a question that I think maybe might be worth reading aloud. It says, "How's information? There lies the challenge. How do you help without losing the power leverage you have as the helper? It's more than a notion, right?" And the thing is, uh, the first thing that came out from me is like, do we actually need power as the helper? Like, is helping and healing a power position, right? Or is it walking alongside? I think that if you earn the trust of people, they will listen to you, right? Like if you are able to connect with them in a way that they know that you have their best interests in them, they will listen to you. Now, I get it. Different conversation, toxic masculinity in sports, right? And like being an athlete and like what does it mean where you're used to being him or her or them, right? Like that's just who you are all the time. We also walk around with masks that most of life is performance act, right? But if we're star modeling that as the helping and healers, it might change the way in which people show up. It's also, regardless of how you show up, it doesn't take away your authority in knowing the knowledge that you know, right? I work with, um, I have a clinical practice. I'm in private practice, work with a lot of first gen professionals, first gen men of color. And a lot of it is like, yo, like I know a lot about psychology, you know a lot about you. How do we come together and build something together? If it's trash, it's on you too. But if we actually make it good, we're cooking together, right? We're making something happen together. So co-elevation becomes the goal and kind of like what we're trying to walk towards. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. If I could jump in here as well, I love how you framed it, Brian, in speaking to the question that was put in recognizing some of the pitfalls that I think the question spoke to of some people don't know how to trust, right? And so I think from a self-preservation standpoint, it is definitely this idea of giving up the notion that a helping position has to have power, while also recognizing when there are shortcomings and maybe different parts of the system or different positions in the system that like, okay, like trust may not be the optimal goal for this. So what is the goal, or do I need to shift a different direction? Because I think that's part of
Hmm.
what can make this so hard is we don't realize that until maybe it's too late, and we have spent so much um, effort working towards building a relationship, building trust, seeing this person's humanity and hoping they're seeing our own. But that has ultimately led to us feeling like we've been harmed. So being able to recognize early where that may not be the space to be able to make the headway, and then we can quickly recognize where others might be, where other spaces.
Hmm. I love that. Absolutely.
My last thing is before we jump more into the Q&A, definitely ask more questions, y'all, if as they're coming up. We have a few coming up in the chat. But how do we navigate? Because sometimes when we hear, a lot of this, it could read as do more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do more than what you're already doing. Push yourself. And as you showed some of those graphics earlier, there's a high percentage of burnout. And then if we look at different identities that people hold, intersectional identities, that burnout can increase even more and more because of all of the responsibility. So how do we navigate the tension between showing up for others and making sure that we are doing that work and attending to ourselves in the way that is sustainable, where we can stay in this work and do quality work?
Mm, I love that. Yeah. I mean, I think that as people and as advocates and activists, the scholar activists, um, we have been really good at fighting, right? And when we think about what that means, it's kind of like, all right, we're gonna go change the system and like we're gonna teach them how to do the thing right because they're messing it up, and we come with like with this fire. Um, the reality is that we see that that's not enough by itself. That's where the sustainability in the 4S's comes in. We saw it during the Black Panther movement. They were great at fighting and creating and like pushing back, right? We saw it during the civil rights movement. We see it during the Chicano movement here in Denver. There was a lot of old school Chicanos that are still around, and they talk about all the ways in which they organized and they fought and they pushed back, but they forgot to also make healing part of the work. They forgot to
Mm.
like be intentional about that part, and that's how we burn out, right? I don't know that it is necessarily doing more, but maybe shifting the way in which we do,
Mm.
right? If you're gonna have to meet with your athlete, regardless, then what would it be like to that small shift? You know, right? Like, let me get to know you. Like, who are you? Who do you represent? What is your purpose? Help me understand that so I can work with you differently, right? And all of a sudden, they're like, oh, so you see beyond just the baseball, basketball, football, whatever player, right? I'm asking questions that are more about you. So it's not necessarily, I think, more work. It's just learning to shift the work we've been doing a little bit more. Uh, I'm sure that none of us came into this field because we don't love people and we don't want to see people do well, right? And sometimes just going back to those values that got us into the profession, and tapping back in with those. Many of us come from collectivistic cultures, right? Where collective emotional experience is part of how we live. So what does it mean to create space for that as well? Being able to say, oh, like it's been a hard week, and we can pick. It feels like we're drinking from a fire hose half the time, right? On how many things are showing up. Um, do we bring that into the room? How do we bring it in? And also making it okay if they don't want to talk about it, right? But letting them know that, hey, I'm here for it. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Make healing a part of the work. And I think we need to hear that over and over again as healing professionals. So thank you for that. Let's transition. We got some good questions kind of coming into the chat, and we could spend the last couple minutes here. So one question is, with this framework being based in Indigenous ways of knowing, I'm thinking about how we build connection through relationship more than just proximity. Given the revolving doors of athletic staff and now athletes with the portal, what suggestions would you have in leading in this way with constant changes in our potential allies and alligators?
Well, that's real, right? Very real. I think that, part of it is if we make a relationship beyond transactional, right? Like we might change places, but that love's still there. I'm gonna give a shout out to Dr. Mac Brown. He was my supervisor when I was a PhD. I haven't been a PhD since 2020. I was a pandemic resident, and every so often, even if it's once every few months, I get that text like, "Hey, I've been thinking of you. How you been?" Right? I think great example of someone that maintains that relationship. When it comes to my academic advisor in my graduate program, and I recognize not everybody had a good relationship with that relationship, but I continue to write with her. I continue to publish with her. The book that we wrote, it was for my master's program, and so like there's a way for us to have a continuous relationship, even if it's not an everyday relationship, right? Like, hey, you were one of my athletes, and I want to check in. How are things going for you? And I know that takes time, but that's part of relationship. The second thing that I'll say is sometimes it's okay for relationships just to be a moment in time. We can cherish them and we can nurture them the same way we do the really long ones, right? Like it can just be right now, and like maybe it's for this year that we're gonna be in contact and connection, but I can be planting seeds for trees I will never see, and that's okay too. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I want to share a response to the answer that you gave about, leverage and power that you have as a notion. Saying it wasn't so much of a question, but saying that as being the person in a helping position slash power and being penalized for being the helper when systems don't want that change.
Okay, I see your face, so it's not just me.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
you're back. You're back. You're back. You're back. You
did
froze
y'all
for
leave me?
you
Okay.
froze for like
You
two
froze a little.
seconds.
You left us. It felt like, but we're here. We're here.
Hopefully my face wasn't looking crazy.
No, you
You
good.
good?
But basically just reaffirming that sometimes there's real implications for, you know, giving that resistance and being penalized, like, um, and it's hard because people, I guess, can isolate you or make you feel like you're doing the wrong thing. You could lose a job, right? Like very real implications for disrupting the system. So that was just a response to that I wanted to share. Anything on that before we jump to the next question? Okay.
Yeah, no, I think
Um, oh,
you're
go
good.
ahead.
You're good.
All right. So this reminds me of some research I was working on with some of my professors and I about the Black barbershop as a space for talking about mental health. Sounds like some Dr. Cross work. With the
Right,
relationship of barber and client being so important and generally being built first, would a relationship like this be more ideal in our field as well?
man. I'm biased, but yeah, right. Like, like if I didn't become a psychologist, I was gonna become a barber. So I would have ended up doing very similar work, I think, just from a different chair, you know. So yes, I mean, like, what does it mean to actually take the moment to do conocimiento before we do work, right? And here's the thing, like, you can ask most of us, we are absolutely loyal to our barbers. You know what I mean? Like, I see
Yep.
that dude more than I see my doctor. I see him more than like, and when I walk in, it's love, right? And it's not love for, oh, well, let me get that money because you're about to get it. It's like, yo, what do you need? I walk out feeling like $1 million, right? Like, I don't think I give him enough money anytime I go see him because usually come in looking a little shaggy and walk out feeling like a new man, you know? And what would it be like if every relationship that we stepped into, we created that space? Like, yo, let me uplift you. Like, let me give you a shout out. How do I make sure that you know that the love that I'm feeling for you is real as a person because I see myself reflected in you, right?
Mhm.
And we know what it feels like to get love. So, how do we reflect that back to them as well?
Yes. As I would say, same for the beauty shop or nail shop or whatever. There's a high sense of loyalty there. Same.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So we have made it through. Unless anyone wants to throw something in the chat really quickly. I know that ASP is having another webinar,
I'll,
so a lot of people have to scoop.
I'll say one last thing for folks to
Hmm.
take, right? And as you were saying that the loyalty piece, people want to know how much you care before they know how much you know. And we have been trained to tell people how much we know first, right? And we tell them our letters after our names, how long we've been doing this thing, all of that. But the reality is that if you show them you care, everything else will come. So
I think that that is a beautiful place to close. Aaron, any last statements from you?
I think just a big thank you to all of our attendees and to Dr. Bryan, Dr. Breigh, for uh, holding and cultivating an incredibly timely space. incredibly insightful and incredibly real space. Um, thinking about what stirred this and facilitated this, it couldn't have come at a better time. And it won't be the last time that we do this, but taking that step to be able to um, and help people see that it can be done and know how it feels and get things from it. I'm just really grateful for that for today.
Well,
Same. Yeah.
yeah, thank
And
you
and
for.
this is an embodiment of everything that you're talking about, right? The relationships that were maintained and created for us to even be in this space together, to be able to like have a meeting of the minds, and even the way that I know I feel more capable. I feel more fulfilled than what I came into this space with, just hearing like-minded people share space together, share thoughts together. So thank y'all tremendously. For everyone, again, want to reiterate our thanks for y'all joining. This will be posted on APA Division 47's YouTube channel. And then be on the lookout for a feedback link that we are going to send to all the participants. Just want to share some data points with Dr. Bryan about what you enjoyed, areas for improvement, but also, you know, to inform future collaborative spaces between Division 47 and ASP as well. So as we close, I want to invite us all to take just a pause together. Just notice what you're leaving this space with, because what we've talked about today, it doesn't just stay here. Go tell it to the masses, share it with all the people in your communities. It follows us back to work, into our sessions, into our classrooms, into our conversations, and into ourselves. We are navigating very complex, layered, and often heavy realities in our roles. And yet we are still being called to lead, to support, to show up, and often without clear answers of how we're supposed to do all of that. Spaces like this remind us that we're not doing that work in isolation. So thank you for that. There's community here. I feel it. I hope y'all felt it as well. There's a shared commitment here, and there are ways for us to move forward that feel grounded and that feel community driven and thoughtful and aligned with the values that we have and wanting to meet the needs of our clients. So, not saying that that work necessarily gets lighter, but we can learn to carry it differently and not alone. So thank you so much, Dr. Bryan, for your leadership, your insight, the wisdom that you shared with us today. Thank you, Aaron, always being my partner in crime, and for your perspective and your presence in getting this together in this conversation. And thank you, everyone who showed up today to listen, to reflect, to engage. We hope that you continue to stay connected to this work and to one another. And like I said, you'll receive a follow-up email with instructions, feedback. We hope that you engage with that as well. And have a wonderful day. Thanks, y'all.
Oh, in la shell. See you in the other link.
Yep.